Good afternoon. I hope you're having an absolutely fantastic day. And as I said last Wednesday, I'm going to be making more videos about my music making process and how I create my tracks. And that's exactly what this video is going to be. I'm just going to go through a little bit of the creation process of my last single, Switzerland, which will be linked down below if you haven't heard it yet. So the first thing that I knew about this track was just that I wanted to make it. I had been on a wonderful skiing holiday with my family in the Jungfrau Valley in Switzerland. And I've been to that place before. Wengen is the little town that we've stayed in before, and we were there again this time, and there's this amazing viewing point just next to the main church in Wengen, and it's absolutely wonderful because you see all the way down to the bottom of the Jungfrau Valley. And I can remember after we'd go back from skiing and have like a cup of tea, I would go for a wander and I would sit on a bench there for, half an hour, 45 minutes every day, just looking out at this view. And that was kind of the inspiration source for this track. But my original idea for the track was that it was just going to be a very simple piano piece. I didn't want to get heavily into production or any of that stuff. I just wanted a really pretty, really nice, simple piece of piano music. But as is always the case with me, I begin something one way and end it a completely different way. And I've always been terrible at only making soft piano pieces. I always end up thinking, oh, that'd be nicer with a string swell in there as well. So to the project. So this right here is the first project file I created for Switzerland. However, this is not the project file that became the final song. This was just my first sort of idea, my first attempt at making it. And there are lots of similarities between this and what I released. However, this is slightly different. So I'll play some of this now. So it starts off in a very similar way. That's the melody. Again. Oh, so there's little string things there, these. I forgot to put those into what actually became Switzerland's, and to this day that really annoys me because when those piano chords first come in the actual track, I still feel like there's something missing that should be going on behind them. This is where it changes from what the original track did. Anyway, that's enough of that because that's not even the track, so why have I brought that up? That's just a sort of crappy first demo attempt that I made. But if we open up Switzerland 3 ? This is the second attempt, right? And I decided that the version that I had just been working on was just total garbage and I didn't want to pursue it. It was too sort of cheesy and lame. And this is what this one sounded like. Boring. Doesn't really have the kind of sense of majesty and wonder that I felt when I was looking out over the Jungfrau Valley. So I scrapped that one and I went back to another version of what the first project file was, which is now called Switzerland 2. So this is the actual project file for the finished track of Switzerland. But like I said, I didn't like it. I thought it was a bit boring and a bit rubbish and a bit lame. But because I'd started that other track and then been like, no, that's no good either, I can remember just thinking to myself, shut up, Tom, just finish it. If you don't like it, write another track, but see what happens if you just keep going with the same track and see what you can create. So that's what I did. So it starts off very similar to the previous one, but the piano comes in earlier. I kind of cut all of the really overly long introductory piano notes in half, basically. That piano is the Spitfire Labs soft piano, which is absolutely beautiful. Especially when I've chucked it through, I think it's Black Hole that I used on there. That plugin is the best like ambient reverb. You wouldn't want to use that on vocals necessarily, but if you want really nice dreamy ambient stuff, Black Hole is so good. It costs $199, but they have flash sales every now and then. I got it for $29, which was great. Lovely piano, lovely reverb. So there are ambiences that are going on through that section, which these are just some kind of string ambiences. So I'm a huge fan of spending time creating textures and ambiences. I mean, a lot of the time it's really easy to do. You can just get something like that, have like a pedal note going and add like a reverb or a delay, but modulate things about the reverb and delay that are going on. And also the intro stuff is really easy. It's literally just piano notes on either side of the spectrum playing like this. Just like, and underneath them there's just this very soft pad that's slightly kind of side chaining, but it's not really side chaining because I've used one knob pumper on it, which is a fantastic plugin. So basically, yeah, it's really boring and drony, and there are some pretty piano notes that come in. Then what I did is this piano here, that goes down to just some more rhythmic notes. But you can hear it in that I made a delay come in to start affecting that, so it would start bouncing around the spectrum. I mean, it's H delay in this project, but in the mix project, I used Echo Boy from Soundtoys. See, very nice, very dreamy, very ethereal, lots of reverb. You may notice that this sounds different to the final thing. That's because this is unmixed. This is the production file. Always separate your production files from your mixing files, but I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. When it came to me trying to work out exactly what direction it went in, what I often will do if I'm stuck in that kind of thing is just experiment, and I'll do something that I wouldn't have expected to do. I had no idea that I would introduce percussion to this track at all, but I kind of had a little happy accident with a sample library and accidentally loaded like a sort of percussive thing instead of what I was going for. Tried playing around with it and found that it worked. So that's why you then get this beat that comes in. So that's a combination of various different libraries. So you've got Scratch Kick, just doing the kick, gives the kick a bit more depth, gives it a kind of crunchy vinyl-y quality on the top. Snap, that's a bit more snappy, and then clap as well. So you've got to layer all of your samples. Then now that sounds quite crap like that, but when you're producing something, it's about getting the building blocks in place. It's mixing is when you make it sound good. The other thing that I did with the percussion, which is really important, which I kind of figured out for myself about doing this, because I've always loved the type of percussion that you get in ambient music and ambient tracks. You know, when things sound kind of sloppy and relaxed, even if they're maintaining a really steady beat, I just didn't know how to get that sound, with the exception of obviously putting like a vinyl emulation plugin on everything, which people do too much these days, I think. Turns out a book is pretty much all you need to create some ambient-y percussion. At least that is how I got around it. This is The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte, sister of Emily Bronte, who famously wrote Wuthering Heights. I don't have a copy of No, I do have a copy of Wuthering Heights, but it's not a old copy. And sometimes before I do this, I go through like loads of different books to experiment on how they're going to sound. But I'm digressing, yeah. Book percussion is something that I'm a big fan of and is what I've used on Her. Probably be able to hear it more obviously now that I've given away the secret. But literally, I'd take a book and just record a whole load of different loops with it, and some of them would be hits, some of them would be rhythmic things. So this track has got some things that go like this. Page turn snares, and you know how you hear that in a lot of ambient music, you get that kind of like... So just record yourself turning pages, record yourself going like this. Anything you want, really. I mean, if you put some reverb and a really interesting ping-ponging modulating delay, if you do this, you could make that sound like fluttering birds, you know, kind of going off into the distance as something climaxes. Yeah. Book percussion was the next thing that I did, because I didn't just want to use this. Page scrapes. Page flutters. Page turns. These are the kind of snares I was talking about. Knife scrapes. Got a Swiss Army knife and just used that. And then Bic pen pot hits. Yeah, I have a pot of Bic pens and I was just smashing them down. Obviously there's a delay on them. But when you put all of that together, and when you put that with the other percussion, so let's have a look at some of the other elements that are going on there. You've got synth bass. Fairly standard. With the exception of the synth bass, there are 3 other synthesizers that make up the kind of climax of this track, and they're all relatively kind of Port Bluey, Owl City, and I thought that would be a nice juxtaposition to the like the strings, which are real string samples. Real string samples, such a strange thing to say. The one that's the most audible is this one. Pretty standard arpeggios. As you can see here, I modulated the cutoff frequency of that synth, so that's why it has that swelling sound. So but the thing that people won't necessarily hear are the other synths. So there's also this one, and there's this one. So those are the synth parts. The only other thing really, I guess, to talk about are the strings. Now, I take my string programming very, very seriously. Most of the music that I write is stuff that I don't publish online. It's stuff that I write for like media composition clients, and that requires good string programming. If you want strings to sound realistic, you have to really put a lot of effort into it. One of the main things that I used to do that I haven't done now for about a year is I would have a string section and just play it as a chord, like on the keyboard. Never ever do that. That just sounds kind of shitty and amateur, unless you're going to turn it into a pad. If I'm producing a string section, I have every individual instrument and I do them all individually. So there's like a glissandoing violin here. That's just playing a single note. But then these are all of the ones that are playing the melody that builds and builds. So this is the cello that first comes in. So the thing with string programming that I do is, as well as using individual sections or individual instruments, you have to modulate their expression or their dynamics. Now, most libraries will have, you know, a dynamics or expression thing that will usually be automatically synced up to a modulation wheel, or in my case, a modulation ribbon at the bottom of this keyboard that just goes up and down, you know. So if I play a note on the second violin, say, just sounds like that. But if you probably can't see here actually, but if I basically put my finger up on this, so when I'm going through something and playing it in, I'm not just going. I'm going. You know, you have to make it sound musical. And what I'll often do as well is then once I've done that once, just redo it all. So just delete all of the modulation and go through it and do it individually. You don't want them all doing exactly the same modulation curves, because then it starts to sound robotic. It starts to sound synthetic. So yeah, strings are really important to me. That's my favorite thing to produce. The string section in its kind of raw form sounds like this. And then everything added together, the production file sounds like this. Right, I know what you're thinking. Tom, that sounds gash. You're not wrong. That does sound like shit. But the reason for that is that I separate my mixing and my production. That would have sounded a lot better before, but I will have bypassed loads of the effects that were on them when I exported them as stems. Now, here's the thing. Mixing requires a totally different mindset to production and composition. I always separate off my production files from my mixing files. So what I would do at this point, when I know that the track is finished as a whole, all of the elements exist and are there, export them all as individual audio files. You can do that really easily in Logic. Say I highlight these, go to File, and don't go to Bounce, go to Export, and then 12 tracks as audio files, and then this will come up. You can call it whatever you want, and the important thing when you're doing this is to bypass the effects plugins, and you don't want to tick that, because you want everything to be at the same level, so that when you bring it into a mix project, you have to start with a completely clean slate. And it's a scary thing to do, because you're so used to it. At this point, I've been listening to this for weeks, I knew how it sounded, but you have to start with everything gone. If there's an effect that you absolutely know you're going to keep, then maybe you could export it without effects. But even then, just create that effect again in the mix project if you really like it. But yeah, start afresh, start it as something new, and then be thinking to yourself that this isn't about me composing something, or this isn't about me producing a track and finishing a track. This is about me sculpting how this sounds. I'm no longer writing the music. It doesn't matter who wrote the music or what its purpose is. Right now, the only thing that's important is making it sound as good as I possibly can. And I'm a shit mixing engineer. I'm very lucky that last year I was living with David Thomas, who is a mixing engineer professionally. And I say last year I was living with him as if I don't see him basically every day these days. Yeah, he's a very, very close friend of mine. So that's been helpful, because he has taught me basically everything I just said about the importance of treating mixing like its own thing. And he's been able to give me tips, but I'm quite proud sometimes. I don't like other people helping me too much with things. So the last year I've been spending a lot more time on mixing. But that is why if I do this now, File, open recent Switzerland mix. So I'm going to close this, not save anything. This is the finished mix project for Switzerland. This is what then became the actual track that is on Spotify and YouTube and all of that stuff. So the first thing that I do when I'm starting a mix is basically what I refer to as admin. I make all of the folders that I need to. I make sure it's all organized. It's annoying to do. It takes time. But trust me, I have tried to mix big projects without having doing this first. And the hour or two it takes to get all of this sorted out properly, and then all of the audio files imported and cut and whatnot to the right lengths, that is worth it than when you're struggling with a project that you've got 80 tracks in and you haven't labeled any of them properly, and you keep trying to find that one that you can hear but you never find it. It's just a pain in the ass if you don't do this. So have everything organized and put things into folders. So summing folders. Another thing you should absolutely do before you start mixing something is this. This is basically an export of the production file. I know what it's like to get attached to a production file and think that, oh, that's the best it's going to sound. It sounds so good. However, if you have that in there, you can then reference what you end up with against it, and very quickly you'll start to notice that when you've done it all again, your mix is sounding better. So as you can see here, I've got my percussion separated off into this percussion there, which is the stuff that's all sort of sample libraries, and then these are my actual recordings in two different folders. This is what the percussion by itself sounds like now. A lot more full, a lot more interesting. Obviously, there are more effects on there as well. Strings as well. The strings will sound a lot more full. So I've got solo ones there and then the individual ones here. So again, because they will require different things. So let's listen to the strings now. Compared to what they sounded like earlier. So yeah, that is the finished project, and often I find that I spend a lot more time on the minute details when I'm mixing. The compositional side of things I find often happens very naturally. Like writing the music isn't what I find difficult, it's making it sound good and making it sound authentic. And in 2 months' time, I'll probably look at this project and think, that's a terrible mix, that's so amateur, that's so shit, what was I thinking? But it's a hell of a lot better than what it sounded like before. So this was the production file in the kind of the main ending of it. The production file sounded like this. Compare that to this. And that is how I created Switzerland. Now, I'm not going to go into detail about every single plugin that I used on every instrument because that would take ages. But if you are interested in that, then I can make a whole video on like how I mixed this track, or I'm going to do some of these videos on the tracks from Her as well. So if anyone's interested in how I produced Her, then I'll be making one of those videos at some point soon as well. Thank you so much to anyone who has been listening to it. There's a link to it in the description if you haven't heard it yet, or if you wanted to hear it. Thank you so much for watching. And again, I'm not here in like a tutoring role. I'm not trying to tell people or teach people this is how to do it. It's just, I know that some of you are interested in what my process is in general, and hopefully that's given you a little bit more of an insight into what my personal process is, and your process could be completely different, and that's fine. You know, there are no wrong answers when it comes to making music. Well, I mean that's bullshit. There are definitely some wrong answers when it comes to making music. I hope it's been helpful or at least interesting for you to watch. This is probably going to be a massively long video. Like I said, I'll be doing some more of these videos. If you like them, I'll make some about how I produce the tracks on Her. If you want to see more of the mixing side of things, then let me know. I'll see if I can sort it out. Although, let's be honest, I'm probably not good enough at mixing for anyone to actually care what that process is for me. But I'm learning, I'm trying. Links down there in the description to this track on Spotify, as well as links to the shop where you can get my debut instrumental EP Her on limited edition heavyweight sky blue vinyl. There'll also be links to the iTunes and Spotify for it, and to my Instagram down there as well. Thank you so much for watching. I really, really do hope that you've enjoyed this. Have an absolutely fantastic day, and I'll see you very soon.